Hello and welcome to Sippin' Tea with Sheri, where I hope to foster connections, community, and meaningful conversations. I invite you to grab a cup of tea or whatever hot drink you prefer and enjoy listening in on our conversation today. Hey everyone, today I am so glad to be joined by my sister, Shayna.
Hello everyone.
She is going to be here on my first ever podcast episode, which is monumental for me, who has a lot of crazy ideas and a lot of them do not ever come to pass. But this is one that I was determined. I had the idea to start a podcast and I was like, Shayna, this is what I'm going to do. And don't let me not follow through on this idea. And we are now on December 12th, 2024. I said that I was going to start my podcast this summer and that just didn't happen. I feel like all my life, summer times, I just have this like vacation mentality and I don't work hard. And that's what happened this summer. So now my goal is to get this, I'm going to say it here to hold myself accountable, is to upload the first episode on January 1st. And the title of this podcast, as you've already seen it and probably heard at the beginning, is Sippin' Tea with Sheri. And we are indeed sipping tea. I know you cannot see us, but I was intending to do video versions of this podcast originally, but I do not have the skills nor the equipment necessary to make a professional looking video podcast, so I decided to just do audio only, and it's much easier for me to make and produce on a low budget and skill. So that is what we are rolling with, and I want to talk about the vision behind my podcast and then a little bit of my own personal life story, and Shayna is just kind of here to have somebody to be interacting with and not just be myself.
Yeah, I'm not here for much.
She also is one of the first people that I talked to this idea about, probably.
She's had this idea, you say this summer, but I feel like you've talked about it farther back than that.
Yeah, no, I have.
I feel like she's had this idea for years.
I am calling this Sippin' Tea with Sheri, and my main overarching vision is to have Anabaptist women / like Anabaptist adjacent women who are similarly minded and going similar directions in life share part of their life story or something they're passionate about for other Anabaptist women. That's sort of my target audience. Mostly, I feel like as traditional Anabaptist women, we, in my understanding, believe that women shouldn't be a part of like the teaching or preaching in the church and leading the church in that way. But there can be other platforms for women to be able to encourage each other and speak into each other's lives. And that is kind of part of my motivation for this. On this podcast, I hope to foster connections, community, and meaningful conversations. One particular thing of why I thought this would be a good idea is that my mom is a mom of a disabled son, and there are other people with other disabilities and things where you are experiencing that parenting journey and there's not anybody else in your church community who is experiencing the same thing, and there's also multiple of our other family members and church family that have different disabilities and things, that it's nice to hear somebody else who's experiencing the same thing share their story, and it helps you not to feel alone and know that there's other people out there who are going through the same thing and understand what you're going through. So that is kind of part of the idea of connecting people to each other, that maybe somebody will come on and share about parenting their child and they will have experienced something similar to you, and you could get in contact with them and maybe meet up and have a connection with that person that somebody who hasn't experienced the same thing as you wouldn't quite get. So that's kind of the connections. And then community, I think that the Anabaptist community has some really good things going for us, and so I hope to just help to build that up and keep that strong community going, and then to foster good conversations. This kind of goes along with connections, but have hard conversations, have deep conversations, and yeah, sometimes it's easy to shy away from things, but I hope that we can be encouraged to ask each other deep questions and have good conversations. So those are kind of the three main like things in my sort of tagline, I guess you could call it. And that is some of my vision for this podcast. Now, some of the other things, there's kind of a lot to all of this stuff, but all of my life I've been sort of a media junkie, or I've watched plenty of YouTube and I've listened to plenty of podcasts and plenty of audiobooks, and I always kind of had this itch of like, I want to do something like that, make some kind of content. And over the years, I thought about a YouTube channel a lot, but there's kind of the stigma that if you put yourself out there in that way, it's kind of can be the way it is, you know? You have to be willing to have people talk about you and say things. And that's not the main reason why I didn't want to do it, but I feel like you can't get away from being like, here, look at my life, and I have it all together, and you should be like me. Like, I know that that's not behind like every YouTuber's intentions, but I personally felt like that would fuel pride and other things where I just didn't know if that was for me, and also don't have the skills to do that. Then the other thing that came to my mind as I had finally come up with the podcast idea was just that I can get other women on and have them share their wisdom and experience, because I don't have that much to share with the world. Like, I mean, I have fun, I like to sing, but I'm like, I don't feel like I have this like burning message that everybody needs to hear, and I have so much to say. So I'm like, how can I have other women on to share what they have to share with the world? And I feel like it's a little bit more beneficial. So I thought that this podcast idea was a much better thing than a YouTube channel. But yeah, I did dream about starting a YouTube channel before. I've watched plenty of YouTube, plenty of clean with me videos, and travel. That's my top genre of YouTube that I like to enjoy. And yeah, I just decided that ultimately it's not for me, and maybe it's for you, but it's not for me. So I'm just going to start by going a little bit over my brief overview of my life, things I've experienced, and then come to when I formulated the idea for the podcast. So I have lived in the same place all my life. I was born and raised in Reading, Pennsylvania, and my dad was also born and raised here, and I have a lot of my extended family live here and are involved in the school that my grandpa started when I don't know how many years ago that was. I always forget the exact number. Around 40 years ago, give or take. So I've lived here all my life, and I have lots of family around me and a solid church community. And one of the main things that sort of defined my childhood was when I was 3 years old, my brother Ryan was diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and he was 8 years old when that was. And I was about to turn 4, but I was still 3 when he got that diagnosis. And it's not just a diagnosis that affects him and his life and our family's life, but it also could affect my children and my children's lives, as well as my sister's. So at that point, we found out that me and my sister were also carriers of it. So it's genetic, and our kids have the 50% chance of getting it if they're a boy and carrying it if they're a girl. So I feel like I'm really briefly just like grazing over this, but I did talk about it a lot more on the episode that I did with my sister Tiffany. So I'm not going to take as much time to delve into that as much. You should definitely go and listen to that episode. But that kind of affected our family a lot growing up, and definitely we're more of a chill, relaxed family. And I think a lot of that is in part to Ryan was not able to do as much physically, so we just tended to do more laid back things as a family. Our family is, really relaxed in that way. Definitely it was a lot to like process and grieve, especially back then. But I was really young, so that wasn't really a big deal in my life at that point, and only more so later as I got closer to like dating and marriage and those things, of really thinking about how that affects me and does affect me and stuff. I also am affected somewhat physically myself from being a carrier, and most diseases, carriers aren't affected by the disease, but it's not that way with Duchenne, and some doctors and healthcare people don't like recognize that as much, but us women themselves, and there's this Facebook group that we're all in. We know how it feels to be affected by this, and it's a spectrum, but I definitely can tell, it's a little bit more laborsome for me to go upstairs and to exercise than for my peers. Yeah, it's not like it's life altering that much, but like I just am conscious of not going and doing intense physical things. And there have been a couple times where I pushed myself too hard and did things that I shouldn't have and regretted later. But yeah, it just is harder for me to do things, and I have a lower like potential for physical fitness than most people do. So yeah, that was kind of a big part of my childhood and growing up. And a lot of my life was surrounded by school. So I mentioned that my grandpa started the school, Fairview Christian School, it's called. And I remember being there before I was even in school. My dad was the administrator. Well, I think he became the administrator a couple years into me being in school, but he taught there for many years. And I remember going with his class on field trips and different things, and my life has just revolved around school since then. And I've been in some form of school every year except for one since I went to first grade. I have many memories of that. I'm not really gonna delve into that too much, but in my high school years, we had this big thing that our school would go to called student convention, or it is from the ACE, or Accelerated Christian Education, which our school used to do their curriculum. We don't so much anymore, but they put on this student convention where you can compete in academics and art and athletics and music and singing and performing and all these other things. And that was a big highlight of my school years. And I would say that that was my high school years, and I really enjoyed it, had a good time, really enjoyed academics. It felt like that was something that I could do well at, and I did. I tried my best, and I did okay in school. Volleyball was another part of my high school years, but as me and my sister talk about in the other podcast episode, it was always a little bit harder for us, and we weren't as into it as most of the other girls just because it was a little bit harder, and we're not that psyched up about it. But we did that because that's what we did. And I don't regret playing volleyball. It just was never my thing that I was gonna like do really well at. So I graduated in 2018, and then I had a year of just doing this and that. I did some cleaning jobs with my mom, and I went to SMBI for 2 terms, and during that time we had a 3-week choir tour to Mexico, which was a big highlight of that time. That was super good. And then while I was at SMBI, my dad asked me if I would teach at school, which I agreed to do. And then I taught at Fairview in 5th and 6th grade for the next 3 years. And towards the end of those 3 years, I was sort of getting the itch for doing something else. Even before the 3 years, at like the 2-year mark, I was like, ugh, I don't want to do this forever. I want to do something else. And the opportunity came up to go to Sattler College for 1 year for their Biblical and Religious Studies certificate. My dad is friends with Zach Johnson, who had been a faculty member back then and is now the president. And he would say all the time, Marcus, you need to get one of your kids to come to Sattler. And it never really seemed to be in the cards for anyone else. And I was looking for something to do. I also felt like I wanted to challenge myself academically than I had been in high school. So I decided to go there for 1 year. And with the possibility of staying another year, I knew that I wasn't really that committed to going for 4 years. Mostly, I felt like my motivation for going was to like get out of my comfort zone, my little 3-block radius that is like my life of church, school, and home. So I didn't feel like it was as much driven to like get a bachelor's degree in something and to like pursue a career or anything, but it was more like I want to get out and grow and experience something different. So I went there for 1 year and then decided to stay for a 2nd year. One of the reasons is I was excited about studying Greek and Hebrew, and I really wanted to. I knew that I felt like I needed to be more excited about studying the Bible, and I still feel like I haven't like gotten to that place yet, but a part of going there was like, oh, if I know that when I know more things about something, or am more competent at understanding something, I feel more invested and more excited about something. So I wanted to just broaden my Bible knowledge. And I still feel like I have a ways to go in that, but it did do really good for me to go there. But over that time is when I came up with this idea of a podcast. And part of it was just, I wanted to be excited about something in my life. And I felt like I was just in this place of like, when am I ever going to get married? And what am I going to do? And I just want to be a stay-at-home mom, but I can't just like make that happen, like whenever I want that to happen. And so I felt like I just needed something to like be excited about, and thought this was a really good idea because I was like, well, I could do this and be single, or I can do this and be married someday. So it just felt like a really good thing that I thought about for a while. I have it written down in my journal the first time that I mentioned this podcast. I don't remember what date that was, but I just saw it the other day in my journal. And so I'd been dreaming this up, and I went through a time of thinking about staying at Sattler for longer. And part of it was because of the podcast. After I started thinking about the podcast, I was like, wow, staying at Sattler for 4 years and getting a degree in biblical studies could be a really good thing, Then maybe I could start making my own like Bible study type podcast, not exactly sure. And they also have a dual degree program with Indiana Wesleyan University where you can do a bachelor's degree with them online as alongside of your Sattler degree. So I started looking into things. Oh, what could go along with a podcast? I found this associate's degree in creative digital media, and it got me really excited about staying at Sattler and doing that degree program. So I was considering staying at Sattler. And then over winter break of that year, my second year at Sattler, I started dating, and someone who had been at Sattler asked me out. His name is Alex Burkholder, and we're getting married in June, so that is really exciting. But I had sort of been interested in him before and was trying not to expect anything to happen.
She liked him for a long time. We knew the name Alex between us sisters. Like, he didn't know we knew him, but me and Tiffany knew Alex Burkholder. Like, we talked about him plenty.
Yeah. So we had talked about him, and then he asked me out, and it was like the craziest time of my life, honestly.
It literally blew my mind. I kid you not. I was freaking out that day when I found out that he asked her out.
And she didn't find out the whole entire day.
Because I was at school, and I don't have my phone at school.
Yes. So I woke up one morning very, very late, and we have to tell this story.
Yeah, we have to.
I had this voice message from Alex, and I just knew. I knew, like, that was out of the ordinary. Like, I had sent him some messages before. And there were a few hints along the way that were dropped. But I knew that this was different and this was unique. So I knew what was up right away. And so I very nervously listened to it, and he asked if he could call me later. And I said yes, of course. And I was trying not to have my voice sound like I just woke up, because that's exactly what happened. But I went downstairs and talked to my mom, and she knew it was going to happen because he had talked to my dad earlier and stuff. And then I talked to him, and he asked me if we could go out, and I said yes, but I was planning to leave for Sattler to go back to Boston on Sunday, and it was currently Friday. It was Friday morning when we talked, so we'd planned to go out on Saturday. So on Saturday morning, we went out and we talked, and yeah, it was good. And then he stayed around, and my family was going out to eat in the evening, so he went out to Longhorn Steakhouse.
Yeah, he joined the fam after the very first date.
Yep. And they sort of spilled the beans on my interest level and all that, which he was kind of nervous about that and wondered. And then he found out that I was very interested, which he was very pleased to be tuned into that fact. So I went back a week early because some other people from Pennsylvania were headed back there at that time. And I really regretted it because I wished we could have been back home, that I could have been in person to have some of those conversations that we had to have at the beginning of our relationship, especially about me being a carrier of DMD and that possibly affecting our children if we were to get married. And honestly, that was like really hard, and especially not being around my family. I just like realized that like we don't really stay in touch that well, and I just felt yeah, like they would actually understand what it was like and what I was going through. And I did talk to my sister Tiffany a lot about that on the phone some. And yeah, that was probably the hardest part about starting to date. And I do remember the one time I just like called my dad in the middle of the night and I was just like, I need to talk to somebody. And yeah, just think about that, because never before had it always was just something that I dealt with myself, and I'm like, I'm fine. I got this. Like, I know what life is like. This is just how things are. But then it just felt like I was bringing that into a relationship where like it was going to affect him and was already affecting him. And I was just like, I just can't keep it from hurting you, and just feeling like it's like you really care about this person, but you feel like you're like hurting them in a way, even though that's like not exactly what you're doing. And also the fact that I had like my whole life to think about this and process this, and then it almost felt like I was dropping a ton of bricks on him. And also we weren't together in person, so that also felt doubly bad. But yeah, just got through that time. And also I know that like it was a really powerful time. Like God was there for him, even though I kind of felt like I couldn't be in every way. But it was probably the hardest part of our relationship, was that first like week or so and talking about some of those things. So that was the beginning of my semester. And let's just say I realized that semester that I did not have 4 years of Sattler in my system. I was kind of in this place of being like, okay, I got this. I can handle this academic load. But I also had like a very short-term mindset of Sattler of 1 year or 2 years. And let's just say that me and academic writing were not like the best of friends. And I kind of had this idea that I could just like get by for like 1 year and not excel at that. But then I feel like I just didn't put the work in to like grow as much as I should have to make a 4-year thing be okay there. And I experienced a little bit of academic burnout, and my classmates know very well what this was like. And they have a quote now: to go full Sheri on an assignment means to just not complete it, because you realize you're going to pass the class whether you do or not, and you're soon going to be done and you just don't care anymore. And never in my life before have I ever cried about academics. And the one day, the end, I called Shayna and I was just like, I can't do it. And I literally cried, and like that had never in my life happened. And I was like, yeah, I've reached my wall. I feel like I reached my ceiling, and I was just like, I don't need to go past this. I don't. So I really wanted to know that I wasn't not going to go back to Sattler because I started dating, or just because of that. I wanted it to be like, no, even if whatever, our relationship wouldn't work out for some reason, I would still be happy with my decision to end my Sattler career then. And I came to the conclusion that, you know what, either way, whether we get married or break up, I'm just done here. And also with that, I had realized, wait, like, I want to start a podcast. That's the most thing I'm excited about. And I can do that whether or not I go to Sattler, even though that would have been a good thing to do. Also, I could do the degree online with Indiana Wesleyan University and not go to Sattler. And I didn't have to do both. So I had been working on some of those courses, and I still might come back to those. I decided to take a break because I just felt like I had too much that I wanted to do this year. And also at the place that I found myself academically, I was just like, I need to be done. I need to be done. And I might pick that back up later. The other thing was I felt like it would be good for a podcast to do those courses, but also I didn't know if it was going to be worth the financial investment, the payoff for doing that. And I almost am now like, maybe I'll just take a couple of courses about technology online, of like, not necessarily college courses, but like people stuff, because you can find so much information out there. The only problem is finding the discipline to like follow through on learning that stuff online. But I feel like I'm just gonna go for this, and I might come back to a degree, especially next fall is when I might start doing something. I also might be more interested in something else like education at some point again. So I'm not committed to a certain degree at this point, but I very well might come back to that at some point. So that's kind of where I was with that, and then came back for the summer. And honestly, I just feel like I didn't have the stamina of like do homework and feel like you should be doing homework all the time. I don't know, maybe my work ethic was the problem. I'm not sure, but I just feel so good being back home and teaching again. It just feels like I know that I'm in the right place and I'm where God wants me to be, because I just feel like I'm doing really well here. And I always thought, I was like, I don't want to teach forever, but taking a break and coming back to teaching, I'm like, okay, I just needed a break, and I actually do enjoy certain things about this. And even though I had kind of said, like, I don't want to come back to teaching unless I get a degree because I don't like feeling like I don't know what I'm doing, but also you find out that, like, yeah, you just find things that you do enjoy and don't enjoy, and you learn to just deal with that. And I just felt refreshed after having been away and to come back and plug back into teaching. So I paused my academic career pursuits, but I might pick something back up. I would suspect at some point I'm just gonna finish something out, but we needed a little break. So that's kind of where I am now. I kind of really brushed over things and didn't really talk about much in depth, but I was just kind of like the facts of where my life has been. One thing that I'll just mention is that I feel like a lot of my life I just sort of like stuffed my feelings and emotions and all the things and was just like the strong, tough girl. If you want to watch Encanto, and I forget her name, but like the strong one.
Luis, I think.
Yeah. I'm like, wow, that's me. And I feel like part of growing in my relationship with God has been getting in touch with my feelings and learning that feelings are good and God made those and I don't have to like not have those, and you know, they can be good. And I feel like I've been able to connect better with God and with people, with others, and part of that is just realizing the pain in my own life and not just like being like, oh no, I'm strong, I got this, I can handle it, but actually letting that affect you and shape you. And I feel like that has been one thing that has been really good for me to learn and grow in, and yeah, has been good. So maybe that's why I started crying over academic things now. I don't know. But before we end up being here literally all night, we're just going to roll into these last questions that I'm going to ask each and every podcast guest that comes onto this podcast.
As this being the Sheri episode, I feel like it's fitting for someone to ask her the questions. Since she's going to ask every other guest the questions, it's fair that she is the first one in the hot seat. So, what is one thing that you do that gives you life?
Singing. I sing. Singing gives me life. And some things that I've realized is that every once in a while I'll be like, oh, I just feel like blah, something's a little off, this or that. And I'll think, when's the last time that I've really just like sang my heart out and been like, that's the problem, that's what I need in my life. And then I turn on music and I sing. Now, I do not play musical instruments very well, so I just turn on music really loud and sing with it. And I realize that music that I listen to is good harmony, good vocals, and I sing and it gives me life.
What is a hot take that you have?
Okay, this is a very recent hot take, but surely there are better ways to celebrate marriage than spending thousands of dollars on catering. Now, this came about as a result of sitting at Open Gate one evening and we were talking about the book of James and not being a respecter of persons, and I forget what chapters, verses in James specifically, but I was like, you know what? We should be donating $5,000 to like people who actually need food rather than spending $8,000 to feed people that have enough money to buy their own food. And I know people have their opinions of like, it's a wedding, you should celebrate, do this and that. And I'm just like, yeah, but the money, but the cost. And I know that there are other places where they just have like dessert and light wedding food or this and that. And I'm just like, why can't I be the one to change, to be the trendsetter? But other people who are more financially invested in the wedding than I am think that we need to do our duty and feed our guests and give them what they expect. So I'll do it, or he will do it. But I just am like, surely there's a better way. There must be a better way.
You should change the trend before I have to plan a wedding.
Yeah, I said, well, my children. I can.
Yes,
I
you
can.
can
My
change it for
children,
them.
my daughters can be the one to change.
Okay. What is one thing that you love?
So right now, the one thing that I love is to crochet. And I had started crocheting many years ago for the convention in high school, and I did a couple projects for that. That's why I learned, I think. Or it was before that I learned. But then I stopped for a really long time, and then recently I picked it up again. And I started making keychains for my students that I give them for the birthdays, and that's been super fun. And I just really love to crochet right now. And also, I've not been picking up as many books because I just want to crochet. Like, I don't want to sit and do nothing. So I'd rather crochet and listen to an audiobook than sit down with a book. So, crocheting.
What has been inspirational or educational for you recently?
So I recently stumbled upon these songs that are the Psalms. And I was a little bit disappointing because first I listened to Psalm 4 and I was like, I love this singer. This is so good. And then I realized that each and every psalm is a different singer and some of them are not as good. And I also came to the realization that I was like, I like female singers so much better than I like male singers.
Hot take right there.
Yeah. So I will put a link for that in our show notes if I figure out how to do those and listen to the Psalms. And it's a really good way for me to get in more scripture. Thank you, Shayna, for asking me the questions. And we will definitely do an episode with you, the Shayna episode.
How honored.
So I'm glad that you could come on here, and this got plenty long. One time, a while ago, I sat down and recorded like 5 minutes of me talking about starting a podcast, and I was like, oh, that's all I have to say. But today, I drank 2 cups of coffee.
That's what happened. This is caffeinated Sheri. That makes sense.
Yeah. And one thing before we close, I did talk about it on my episode with Christy, but why the story behind the name Sippin' Tea with Sheri, let's do another little clink to our Sippin' Tea with Sheri, is that at Sattler we have something called Tea Time, where somebody shares a pearl of wisdom. We call it a pearl, just basically like a little 5-minute or less devotional, or intended to be 5 minutes or less. So I was like, it has Sattler ties, and then it has like a little bit of like spilling the tea, like sipping the tea, but not in a dramatic way, in a like, what's the real to life, like, in the world of Anabaptist women. So kind of that, and then the other way that the tea is just like, gives the relaxed, like tea time vibes, like sit back, relax. I know sometimes podcast listening happens in the car or when you're cleaning or doing this or that, but I just invite you, when you listen to this podcast, to grab a cup of, it doesn't have to be tea, your favorite hot drink. I know coffee is great, but it just didn't have the same sipping coffee with Sheri. Like, it had to be the tea, because then it had the ties to Sattler and all the other things. Also, the last funny story is ChatGPT has been instrumental in my journey to starting a podcast. I was
not expecting you to say that.
So, this nice little audio interface that I had to buy, ChatGPT told me to get that. ChatGPT recommended these microphones. Actually, I feel like I looked somewhere else. But I started feeding ChatGPT information about podcast titles. And it was like, where Anabaptist women share about their lives and what they're passionate about. And the first title it gives me, Anabaptist Women Unveiled. You know, it kind of had like...
Could have been interesting.
I know, it could have been. It might have been a little polarizing, a little bit like poking at our religion stuff, but really funny. But also, I didn't want to have Anabaptist in my title, because while that is my target audience, it's not the only people that can find benefit and enjoyment from listening to this, so I wanted to steer away from that. But it was so good. I'm like, ChatGPT just has a good, like, you know, brain on its head.
Yeah, it's great. It's crazy.
Yeah. So that was a little bit fun with that. And I am hoping that my idea is that I can do seasons, and right at the beginning here, I'm going to do 6 weeks and 6 episodes, 1 episode each week, and call it season 1. I'm hoping over the course of this year, I'm giving myself a low ball and saying maybe I can do 3 seasons of 6 episodes each, 18 episodes. That doesn't sound like a lot, but I'm also getting married this summer and planning a wedding and doing all these things. So I have a lot of other things going on, and decided that I just need to keep going one step forward. I feel like this is a marathon, not a sprint. So I was not getting discouraged by it taking me longer than I thought to get myself moving, because I've been taking baby steps. I've been recording episodes, doing this and that. And yeah, we're going. It's going. It's a thing. I'm a content creator.
It's kicked off. There are episodes ready to come.
Yes.
And we're ready to start.
Yeah. And we just need to have our little theme music and our little fun little intro, fun little outro, and we're all set. It's a podcast. And as always, love God, love people, and seek His kingdom first.